Start, bench, cut these 3 Penn State running backs in college. Can you tell me who Penn State football is playing this weekend?
Sorry, what?
Welcome back into the Penn State Pulse. I'm your host, Dylan Dawson. Penn State dropped their first game of the season last Saturday when Ohio State was able to leave Beaver Stadium with a 20-13 win over the Nittany Lions. Penn State had their moments, and they looked very good at times, but at the end of the day, they were just too inconsistent and mistake-ridden to be able to pull this one out. You can't straight up blame the refs, but they certainly didn't help. There was a pretty clear catch and fumble recovered by Penn State that was later overturned. There was a pretty weak taunting penalty called early on Elliott Washington for stepping over an Ohio State receiver, something that happens quite a bit without penalty in college football. There were numerous holding calls never called on OSU's offensive line, pass interference calls never called on their secondary. The main thing that lost this game for Penn State was not the refs, though. It was the lack of execution in the red zone, and specifically down inside the 5-yard line. Not once, but twice, the Nittany Lions found themselves first and goal from inside the Buckeyes' 5-yard line, and they came away with a total of 0 points in those situations. End of the first half, you had Trey Wallace bobble a perfectly thrown fade ball that ended in an Ohio State interception. Then you had a first and goal later on in the game, trailing by a score, and the offense goes 4 and out. It was a goal line stand by the Buckeyes. Not only did Penn State run 3 times in a row up the middle, but those first 3 plays were out of shotgun formation all 3 times. I say at least line up under center and let your running back get ahead of steam before initiating contact in that scenario. And then on 4th and goal, they try to hit Tyler Warren out in the flat. That's covered, so Drew tries Khalil Dinkins across the middle, who happened to be fighting through triple coverage. Again, probably a PI on Ohio State, but no call. I feel like you need a safety route in that situation, but it was 1 read, 2 read, and throw for Aller. Maybe run mesh where you can create some traffic in the middle with that OSU secondary, leaking a receiver on an under route out to the right side. I mean, the left, if you line someone up on the left side of the field there and leak them to the wide side of the field, they had a lot of space to work with. I feel like that could have been done at least for a safety route, maybe if Khalil wasn't open, which he was not. It was just a very uninspiring sequence and game overall from Andy Kotelnicki and the Penn State offense. I truly can't comprehend why Tyler Warren didn't touch the ball in that goal-to-go situation, especially after the drive he was having. On that drive where Penn State went 4 and out on the goal-to-go situation, Tyler Warren had a catch of 31 yards followed by a run of 33 yards. We've seen them line Warren up in Wildcat and just send him flying up the middle on numerous occasions, and it felt like the obvious guy to go to in that scenario, regardless of how Ohio State lined up. We saw on that 33-yard run, it was maybe a zone off-tackle run, and he just bounced it to the sideline and outrun everyone anyways at 260 pounds. So I think you just put the ball in his hands in that situation. If Ohio State stacks the box, they have 8 guys crowding the line of scrimmage. Maybe you run a pop pass. I don't know. But I think you get the ball in Tyler Warren's hands in that scenario, and that's kind of a non-negotiable. I'm very surprised that Andy Kotelnicki didn't try it until 4th and goal. He technically did try to get the ball to Tyler Warren on 4th and goal, but regardless, it did not touch his hands on those 4 straight plays, and that is inexcusable in my opinion. Penn State paid the price, and that was pretty much the turning point of the game, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So let's jump into what and who stood out to me in a positive manner. First up, Penn State has another budding star at cornerback, and that is Zion Tracy. He is the one that obviously had the pick 6 on Ohio State's first possession to set Beaver Stadium on fire. I don't know how many of you can actually see me on the sidelines, but I went sprinting down the sideline after that pick 6. I didn't really know what – I just had a ton of energy. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just took off down the sideline. That was one of the best moments I've had in Beaver Stadium with a bunch of my friends, a bunch of you guys. My guy Richter, we were freaking out together. Jamie, it was a lot of fun, but unfortunately the game was pretty much downhill from there. But on that play, that was a perfect switch between Tracy and Jalen Kimber. Just a textbook route jump and a beautiful play on the ball by Zion Tracy. He was also around the ball in a handful of other plays. You look at his stat sheet, and it was pretty bleak for the game, which is usually a good sign for a corner, at least 90% of the time. Ohio State was not throwing at him, and that's all you can really ask for out of him in coverage. If you're not getting targets your way, it's probably because you are in good coverage. So another standout DB from last Saturday was Zachy Wheatley at safety. He had an enormous play of his own when he was able to punch that ball out of Will Howard's possession as Howard was on his way to a seemingly easy rushing touchdown. If Howard were to score on that play, it would have put Ohio State up 21-10 with 21 unanswered points after Penn State scoring the first 10, and all the momentum would have been in the Buckeyes' favor. The game's probably over by halftime, especially considering Penn State's performance on the offensive side of the ball. But Wheatley was able to dislodge that ball at the 1 yard line pretty much, and it rolled out of the end zone for a touchback and essentially wiped 7 points off the board for the Buckeyes. Zachy also led the team in tackles with 9, and he had a nice PBU on the day as well. Abdul Carter had a great day coming off the edge. I had him as my Nittany Lion of the game after he was able to record 2 sacks and 2 tackles for loss on top of his 4 total tackles. If I had to guess, he was probably clearly held about a dozen times on Saturday, and he just wasn't getting the calls. I mentioned OSU not getting called for holding, and almost all of them were on Abdul upon rewatching the game. His first step was just crazy, and Ohio State kicked their left guard out to tackle for the game because their first 2 left tackles were both down with injuries. And you could just tell that the guard wasn't really keeping up with Abdul's first step. He was just flying past him on half of his reps. And he was getting a little handsy, and the refs just weren't calling it. So it kind of went both ways, though. They just weren't calling a ton on either team. Going back to Abdul, though, this is probably a 3 or 4 sack performance, if not for said holds. This is a performance that elevates your standing in the NFL draft. If he continues on this trajectory, Abdul Carter is probably a top 10 pick come April. Next up, a very quiet performance, but Ryan Barker continues his statistically perfect season at kicker. He hit from 29 and 44 yards against OSU, and that 44-yarder was beautiful, man. It has some serious air under it, probably good from 55. Barker's now up to 8 for 8 on field goals on the season, and 13 of 13 on extra points as well. You just can't overstate how huge Ryan stepping up has been for this team. We might have lost on Saturday, but he again did his part, putting 7 points on the board with the 2 field goals and then his extra point. I don't want to say he's become automatic now, but he has been statistically. I don't want to jinx anything, but great start for Ryan Barker. Super glad he's stepping up for this team. All right, so as far as the team as a whole, we have been used to the cold starts and big second half performances, and the script kind of flipped on Saturday against Ohio State. That team that we're used to, starting cold, they opened with a 14-play, 61-yard drive and scored on their opening drive, which we haven't seen from this offense this year. That was also an 8-minute drive. It was like 8 minutes and 6 seconds, something like that. And then they turned around, and the defense cashed in on a pick 6 on Ohio State's first drive. And that made it 10-0 Penn State. Super hot start, and then it was a pretty slow downhill slide from that point on. Ohio State scored 17 unanswered following that 10-0 Penn State run. PSU scored 3 points in the final 47 minutes of the contest. That's just not going to get it done. They really need to figure out how to play a full 4 quarters, full 60 minutes of football, because this is an elite team if they can just be consistent. We've seen the flashes. We saw them against Ohio State. They just need to connect the dots, and there is still time to do so because they are in playoff contention. Now with the 12-team format, 1 loss is far from an end to your season. They could probably have a second one realistically, even though no one wants that. But 10-2, 11-1, they make the playoffs. they can still play at an elite level and maybe win some games in the playoffs. So that's definitely something to work on. But the hot start was nice to see. That was the area that I wanted to include in this segment. I really like the hot start from this team. So slow ends to games, I guess, is the first part of this next segment, which is areas for improvement. But let's jump into what else I saw from the game against the Buckeyes in particular. Let me preface this segment by saying that your issues as a team will typically look worse than they are in reality against an elite team like Ohio State. Just like your big plays or your strengths as a team could be overplayed in the same scenario. Everything's just, the magnitude is just so much bigger on a bigger stage. Sometimes people just like to overplay things, negative or positive. So first of all, the run game. That has become a serious issue for Penn State. In my opinion, it's kind of been on a downhill slope since conference play started. It was another disappointing showing from the running backs in particular, which are obviously what the run game is centered around. Katron Allen had 12 carries for 27 yards, which comes out to 2.3 yards per carry. And then Nick Singleton went 6 for 15, 2.5 yards per carry. The longest carry all game between the two was when Katron went for a 7-yard gain. That's just absolutely not going to cut it. Once again, not going to cut it against the Ohio States of the world. Next, the Penn State wide receivers. They are once again becoming a big talking point, especially when discussing this team's offensive struggles. PSU wide receivers combined for 3 catches for 49 yards on Saturday. Combined. 2 from Trey Wallace for, I believe, 45 yards, and then Julian caught a pass for 4 yards. The other 10 completions went to Tyler Warren, who had 6, and then Nick Singleton, who had 4. I'm sorry, flip those. I believe Nick had 6, actually. So a running back led your team in receptions, and then Tyler Warren was like 4 for 47, I believe. Then if your receivers, just scrap that. If your receivers are that much of a non-factor, defenses will stack the box and commit to the run, which is what we saw on Saturday. You need to stress the defense and keep them honest with that constant deep threat, and the Nittany Lions just did not have that against Ohio State. I still think Trey Wallace is the guy at wide receiver 1 if it's going to be anyone, and he has yet to step into that role following his big 2-touchdown performance against West Virginia to open the season. So this is a pretty alarming stat if I've ever seen one, if I've ever spewed one out. We are now 5 games into conference play this season, and no Penn State receiver has scored a touchdown in those 5 games. Moving on, this next one is unlikely to be a long-term issue, but I had a problem with Tyler Warren's volume of touches on the biggest stage last Saturday. Tyler had 4 catches for 47 yards and 3 carries on the ground for 47 yards. So that is combined 7 total touches for 94 yards. Do the quick math, that's about 13.5 yards every time Warren touched the ball, yet he only did so 7 times. Good things happen when the football is in Tyler Warren's hands. I think that can go without being stated out loud, but here we are. Let's not create an issue out of something that should be a big positive, a big plus for this team. Get the ball in Tyler Warren's hands. Okay, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Penn State Pulse. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Cheer up. We took an L this week, but it is whiteout week now. Penn State is right in the thick of the playoff race, and this 2024 team still has a ton of big accomplishments to achieve. So I need those vibes to be up, Nittany Nation, and I will see y'all in a few days.